That omission is not accidental. In the Vatican archives, certain events are preserved without temporal anchors, filed instead under doctrine, protocol, or exception. This wedding, if it may still be called that, belongs to such a category. It appears not as a celebration, but as a procedural anomaly recorded across multiple offices in the same night. The institution was Rome. The authority was clerical. The space was enclosed, consecrated, and guarded. Witnesses existed. That is the problem. The marriage was not private. It unfolded under observation, clerics, functionaries, and select lay affiliates positioned according to rank. Candles were set not for warmth, but for measure. Bells did not ring. Silence was enforced. The bride and groom are unnamed in surviving copies. Their identities appear redacted in different inks, suggesting revisions across decades. Where names should be, there are symbols. Where family lines should be traced, there are margins left blank. This was not negligence, it was design. The first ceremony followed the outward form of matrimony, vows recited in liturgical Latin, witnesses acknowledged, blessing delivered with measured restraint. Nothing in the language violated canon, nothing in the posture betrayed deviation. The couple stood still as instructed. When the words concluded, the record notes, "Rite concluded, do not disperse." The witnesses did not leave, the bride did not move, the groom was instructed to step back. A second officiant entered. This is where the record diverges. In one account, the officiant is described as a custodian of order. In another, as a corrective authority. Titles vary, but the function remains consistent, oversight. The second ceremony did not annul the first, it repeated it. The same vows were spoken again, the same witnesses stood again, the same candles burned lower, the same silence remained. The repetition unsettled those present. Some accounts note confusion, others record compliance without question. No protest is documented. The Vatican does not record disorder within its walls unless disorder serves a later purpose. At the end of the second rite, a notation appears beside the margin. Insufficient. No explanation follows. The third ceremony began before dawn. By this time, the witnesses were exhausted. Their presence had shifted from ceremonial to compulsory. A locked door is mentioned, not described, merely noted as closed. The atmosphere is recorded as restrained. The couple did not exchange rings again. Instead, the officiant read from a supplemental text not included in standard matrimonial canon. Portions of this text are missing. The remaining fragments emphasize obedience, continuity, and endurance. Words such as binding, witnessed, and unalterable recur. This third rite did not end with blessing. It ended with instruction. The groom was dismissed. The bride was not. The record does not say she resisted. It does not say she consented. It does not say she spoke. Silence dominates every surviving page. What followed is not described as an act, but as a transition. The bride's status changes in the margins, from uxor to a term no longer in use. The meaning of that term has been debated by historians for centuries. Some translate it as entrusted, others as retained. The witnesses were released at sunrise. Each signed a document before leaving. The document is not preserved, but its existence is referenced in 3 separate ledgers. Those ledgers were stored in different locations, ensuring redundancy. No one spoke of the wedding afterward, not publicly. Privately, however, anomalies surfaced. One witness requested reassignment within a year. Another entered monastic silence shortly thereafter. A third disappeared from all clerical roles without recorded death or excommunication. Patterns emerge only when names are compared across centuries. The institution never acknowledged wrongdoing. There was nothing to acknowledge. No crime had been defined. No law had been broken, at least none that the institution recognized as binding upon itself. That is the mechanism. Control does not require force when structure itself enforces compliance. The repetition of the ceremony served a purpose beyond ritual. It tested endurance. It confirmed submission. It created a shared burden among witnesses, knowledge that could not be spoken without implicating oneself. The Vatican understands this well. Shared silence is stronger than shared belief. By morning, the event had been sealed into record but not into memory. The lack of narrative ensured confusion. The absence of names ensured distance. The multiplicity of ceremonies ensured doubt. If questioned later, a witness could say they saw nothing improper because nothing singular occurred. Only repetition, only procedure, only order. This is how lines are crossed without appearing to move. In the centuries that followed, fragments of this wedding surfaced in marginalia in censored correspondence in ecclesiastical debates that never named their source. Always indirect, always oblique, always contained. The bride is never mentioned again. The groom appears once more years later attached to a different record in a different role under a different vow. The institution remained unchanged, and the witnesses, those who survived, carried something that could not be confessed because it had never been formally defined. The Vatican did not need to erase the event. It only needed to repeat it until it dissolved into ritual. And yet something persisted. A question without a date, a marriage without closure. A night repeated 3 times, watched by many, recorded by few, and understood by none. The archive ends here for now. After the wedding night, there is no immediate trace of consequence. No accusation, no inquiry, no formal correction. Instead, documentation begins to accumulate, slowly, deliberately, across unrelated offices, marriage registries, personnel assignments, housing records, liturgical permissions. Each fragment alone appears harmless. Together, they form a containment structure. This is how the institution operates. No single document carries the burden of truth. The burden is distributed until it becomes invisible. Within months of the ceremony, a procedural memorandum circulates internally. It does not reference the wedding. It references irregular repetitions of sacramental form and recommends clarifying authority in matters of witness endurance. The language is clinical. The implication is not. Witnesses, it states, are not merely observers. They are instruments. The Vatican had learned something that night. Repetition under observation produces compliance without resistance. The longer the ritual continues, the less likely a participant is to question its legitimacy. Fatigue replaces doubt. Structure replaces morality. This insight is never framed as doctrine. It is embedded into protocol. Assignments begin to change. Clerics who attended the wedding are relocated, not together, never together. Each is placed in an environment where silence is rewarded. Remote dioceses, monastic orders, administrative posts with no outward authority. One is assigned to cataloging texts already deemed obsolete. Isolation, not punishment. The bride's new designation appears again briefly in a housing ledger. The term is crossed out, replaced by a number. That number corresponds to a residence inside a restricted quarter. The residence is not a prison. It is not marked as disciplinary. It is described as protective. Protection implies threat, but no threat is named. Requests for clarification begin to surface years later, never from the original witnesses, but from junior clerics encountering inconsistencies in the records. Why was this marriage recorded 3 times? Why do signatures repeat? Why does the bride's lineage terminate abruptly? Each request is answered, not with denial but with redirection. Files are reassigned. Questions are reframed. The system absorbs inquiry the way stone absorbs rain. Nothing splashes, nothing cracks. One marginal note survives from this period, written by an archivist whose hand appears nowhere else in the records. It reads, "Procedure protects itself." The institution's power lies not in secrecy, but in normalization. By repeating the wedding, it stripped the act of singular meaning. By documenting it excessively, it buried significance under volume. By distributing responsibility, it ensured no individual could claim authority to speak. Psychological pressure did not come from threat. It came from belonging. Question the event was to question the archive. To question the archive was to question continuity. And continuity is the Vatican's highest value. Over time, the third ceremony becomes the only one referenced. The first 2 fade into footnotes. Later copies omit them entirely. The wedding is no longer described as repeated. It is described as confirmed. Confirmation is a powerful word. It suggests doubt existed and was resolved. The groom's later reappearance in the records is instructive. He is listed not as husband, but as participant in special observance. His career advances modestly, never prominent, never marginal, safe. This is how loyalty is cultivated, proximity without elevation. Of the bride, nothing further is written directly, but policies change. A new guideline appears decades later regarding the presence of women in certain consecrated spaces. It references historical exceptions and emphasizes containment for preservation of order. Scholars debate its origin. None connect it openly to the wedding. They do not need to. Institutions remember differently than people do. They remember through repetition of form, not retention of story. What remains psychologically devastating about the event is not what occurred, but how completely it was absorbed. The witnesses were not traumatized by violence. They were unsettled by coherence. Everything fit too well. Every step followed from the last. Nothing required improvisation. There was no moment to object. That is the most effective method of control. The archive grows quiet after this point. Mentions become rarer, references more abstract. The wedding ceases to be an event and becomes a precedent. Precedents do not scream, they hum, and beneath that hum is silence, maintained, distributed, enforced not by fear but by structure. No confession emerges, no denunciation survives, only alignment. And alignment, once achieved, is almost impossible to reverse. The Vatican did not need to threaten its witnesses. It only needed to make them part of the system that required their silence. The record does not end here, but it becomes harder to read. There is no concluding document, no declaration, no formal closure. Instead, the record thins, gradually, deliberately, until absence itself becomes the evidence. This is not neglect. It is erasure executed through procedure. By the time later archivists encounter the wedding, it exists only as residue, an extra signature, a duplicated seal, a reference without antecedent. The institution has done what it always does when an event threatens coherence. It has dissolved the event into structure. Silence in this system is not emptiness. It is maintenance. The witnesses age out of relevance. Some die without record. Others are absorbed fully into clerical routine, their earlier proximity to the event rendered meaningless by decades of obedience. One name appears in a death register with a note of faithful service. Nothing else. No annotations. No marginalia. That, too, is deliberate. The bride's absence becomes institutional fact. Where absence persists long enough, it ceases to require explanation. New generations of clerics inherit the archive without curiosity for what is missing. They are trained to trust continuity, not completeness. The Vatican does not fear forgotten names. It relies on them. What survives instead are indirect consequences. Architectural changes within certain consecrated spaces. Adjustments in access protocols. Language shifts in canon commentary that emphasize endurance over consent, continuity over individuality. Each change is minor. None cite precedent. Together they form a lineage, a legacy without attribution. Centuries later, scholars argue about the meaning of repetition in ritual. Some describe it as redundancy, others as emphasis. A few note that repetition under authority can function as transformation, but they stop short of implication. Academic caution mirrors institutional design. Nothing is ever stated outright. That is the final method. The wedding crossed a line not because of what it did, but because of what it proved. That authority does not need spectacle to assert itself. It needs only form, witnesses, and time. The institution did not correct the event. It incorporated it. Once incorporated, the event ceased to exist as something separate. It became indistinguishable from order itself. This is why there is no resolution. Closure would require acknowledgement. Acknowledgement would require distinction. Distinction would require admission that something occurred outside acceptable bounds. Vatican does not admit that. Instead, it allows echoes, anomalies that surface briefly then disappear, stories whispered without detail, records that refuse to align perfectly. These are not failures of the archive. They are signals of successful containment. The night of the wedding does not end. It repeats, structurally, not literally. Whenever ritual overrides individual presence, whenever observation replaces choice, whenever silence is mistaken for peace, the archive closes without final word. No judgment is rendered, no lesson is stated. Only the institutional hum remains uninterrupted, self-sustaining, a wedding without names, a night without date, a line crossed so completely that it vanished, and a system that endured not despite the crossing but because of it.